Adrian slid the diamond ring onto another woman's finger while Evelyn still held his mother's champagne tray. The crystal stem trembled against her palm, though not a drop spilled. Around her, the ballroom glowed in gold and black, all polished marble, candlelight, and old money trying to look elegant while feeding on humiliation. A string quartet kept playing as if betrayal had a rhythm. Guests turned in slow waves, first toward the ring, then toward Evelyn, because cruelty in rich rooms always searched for a witness before it searched for a victim. Adrian did not even look at her at first. That was the worst part. Not the affair, not the ring, the dismissal. Then he looked. His expression held the cold impatience of a man irritated that the wrong piece of furniture had remained in the room. Evelyn had spent 3 years helping him rise from reckless heir to polished executive, rewriting his proposals at 2 a.m., smoothing scandals before they reached the press, standing beside him without ever being claimed in public. She had mistaken usefulness for devotion. Tonight, under the chandeliers of his family's estate, he corrected that mistake in front of 200 people. "Set the tray down," Adrian said. One sentence. No softness. No shame. The kind of command men used on staff when they wanted the room to understand rank. Evelyn obeyed because dignity, when wounded, sometimes moved with terrifying precision. She placed the silver tray on the edge of the bar and finally looked at the woman wearing the ring. Celeste. Younger, louder, wrapped in white satin and victory. Celeste lifted her hand just enough for the diamond to catch the light, then smiled at Evelyn with the bright little malice of someone who had won something she did not understand. "Oh," Celeste said, glancing at the black dress Evelyn had worn because Adrian's assistant told her the event required formal service attire. "I thought she was one of the house girls." A few people laughed. The room did not explode. It tightened. That was how elite cruelty worked. It cinched around the throat first. If that insult made your blood boil, stay with this, because silence was the last mercy Adrian would get. Evelyn's face did not crack. Her eyes remained steady, dark and unreadable, but inside her, an old structure collapsed cleanly. She remembered every promise Adrian had made in private and every introduction he had avoided in public. She remembered the apartment he never let her post from, the vacations disguised as work retreats, the way he liked loyalty most when it came without witnesses. In one brutal minute, she saw the full architecture of the lie. He had not chosen love over her. He had chosen advantage over loyalty, spectacle over truth, inheritance over honor. And still he was not finished. "My father will be here any minute," Adrian said, adjusting his cuff links as if this engagement had been a board decision. "Don't make this embarrassing." For the first time, Evelyn gave him her full attention. There it was. Not guilt. Fear. Not of hurting her, but of being seen hurting her by the only man in the room whose judgment still mattered. Victor Moretti was not just Adrian's father. He was the architect of the empire behind the family name, a man spoken of in lower voices after midnight, a man who could remove comfort from a life with a single quiet sentence. Adrian was not afraid of conscience. He was afraid of consequences. "Embarrassing?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was low, almost gentle, and that frightened him more than shouting would have. Celeste stepped closer, eager now, sensing blood in the water. "You should leave before security walks you out." That was the moment the humiliation became public policy. Not heartbreak. Erasure. Evelyn could have begged. She could have slapped him. She could have run. Instead, she made the first decision that changed everything. Champagne still trembled in crystal flutes when Evelyn set her engagement ring on the white linen tablecloth between Adrian's untouched dessert spoon and Celeste's manicured hand. The private dining room on the 42nd floor had been designed to make ordinary people feel small. Black marble walls, gold-veined stone, a skyline burning beyond the glass like a kingdom laid at someone's feet. Now all of it seemed to bend around one tiny circle of platinum and diamonds. Conversations at nearby tables slowed. Forks paused in midair. Even the pianist in the corner missed a note. "I won't wait to be removed," Evelyn said. No one had expected dignity to sound that calm. Adrian stared at the ring as if it were a threat. A minute ago, he had still believed this would end the way every insult had ended before, with Evelyn swallowing it, lowering her eyes, preserving his image while he protected his appetites. Celeste had counted on the same thing. Public humiliation worked best when the victim agreed to carry it. But Evelyn did something neither of them understood. She refused the role they had assigned her and turned the room into a witness. The maitre d' had already looked over. Two hedge fund wives by the window were whispering behind raised champagne glasses. A junior executive from Adrian's firm shifted in his chair, pretending not to stare. Reputation moved faster than elevators in places like this. By sunrise, what had happened here would have a dozen versions and only one conclusion. Adrian Kane had discarded his fiancée in public for his mistress. That was a social wound, not yet a mortal one. Evelyn decided to make it cost more. From her handbag, she drew a slim black envelope embossed with the crest of the Moretti Foundation. Adrian's face changed before she even opened it. Cold left his features first, then color. "You told me to leave," Evelyn said softly. "So I will. But not before I return something that was never really yours." Celeste frowned, confused. Adrian did not. Inside the envelope was an ivory invitation card, heavy as a verdict. Victor Moretti's Winter Gala. Invitation for Adrian Kane and fiancé. The event was not just a charity spectacle. It was the door. Every governor, judge, donor, and predator with polished shoes would be there. And more important than all of them, Victor would be there, Adrian's father, the man whose approval was never spoken of in public and never ignored in private. Evelyn slid the card across the table. The room went quieter. Adrian stood so abruptly that his chair scraped the marble floor with a harsh metallic cry. "Don't do this." There it was. Not sorrow. Not love. Fear. For 3 years, Evelyn had learned the shape of that fear without fully understanding it. Adrian could survive gossip, scandal, even broken promises. But he could not survive appearing weak, reckless, or dishonorable in front of Victor Moretti. The old man tolerated vice. He despised stupidity. And publicly replacing a respectable fiancée with a mistress days before the gala was not romance. It was stupidity wrapped in lust. Celeste touched Adrian's sleeve. "What is that?" He didn't answer. A waiter approached, uncertain, and Evelyn looked at him with such composed politeness that he stopped 2 feet short, suddenly aware he was standing near a detonation no service training could manage. She rose from her chair in one smooth motion, not dramatic, not rushed, just finished. The sound of fabric against leather seemed louder than the jazz. "If I attend," she said, "I attend as the woman your father invited beside his son. If I do not, he will ask why." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Evelyn." "Say her name again." Celeste snapped, finally sensing that she was no longer the winner in the room. Evelyn turned to her then, and for the first time there was no pain in her face, only clarity sharpened by betrayal. "You can have the seat I'm leaving," she said. "You just may not like the table it brings you to." A few people heard that. Enough. The summons arrived before the dessert plates had been cleared, carried not by a waiter, but by one of Victor Moretti's men in a charcoal suit that looked stitched from thread itself. No raised voice followed it. No public scene. Just a small white card placed beside Evelyn's folded napkin, embossed with a single line in black ink. "Library." Now, the air in the private dining room changed before anyone moved. Adrian saw the card and went pale in a way no one at the table had ever seen from him. Celeste's smile faltered, not from guilt but from instinct. Even she understood that Victor did not invite people twice. Evelyn rose without asking permission. Her black dress still marked her as staff in a room built to separate service from bloodline, but the way she stood no longer belonged to either category. Adrian pushed back his chair hard enough for the legs to scrape marble. "Don't go in there alone." His warning came too late to sound protective and too weak to sound commanding. Her eyes met his for only a second. "You already decided who stands alone." Then she walked out. The library sat at the end of a dim corridor paneled in dark walnut, away from the glass and the city lights, where the hotel's polished glamour gave way to something older and more dangerous. This was Victor's taste stripped of performance. Leather, smoke, old paper, a bar cart lined with cut crystal, and silence heavy enough to press against the ribs. Floor-to-ceiling shelves rose like a private court of judgment. A fire burned low despite the summer heat, as if the room answered to no season but his. Victor stood near the window with one hand behind his back and the other around a glass of bourbon. He did not ask her to sit. He expected trembling. Apology. Maybe tears. What he got was a woman who closed the door softly behind her and kept her chin level. For a long moment, he studied her the way men like him studied leverage, looking for fracture lines, hidden hunger, the point where dignity could be purchased cheaper than loyalty. "My son has poor taste," he said at last. "In women, in timing, and in public manners." Evelyn did not flinch. "Then this meeting isn't about his manners." A flicker moved through Victor's face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. "No," he said. "It is about what you intend to do next." She had expected insult, maybe pity dressed as generosity. Instead, he offered her the one thing more destabilizing than cruelty, respect sharpened into a test. He crossed to the bar cart, poured a second drink, and set it untouched before her. "I know what girls in your position usually ask for," he said. "A settlement, an apartment, a recommendation, enough money to disappear with pride still intact from a distance." The crystal caught the firelight. Amber. Expensive. Dangerous. Evelyn looked at the glass, but did not touch it. "Then you've called the wrong woman." The room went still. Victor turned fully toward her now, his expression cooling into interest. "What do you want?" Not revenge, though it had burned hot enough in the dining room to feel like oxygen. Not his son back. That corpse had already been buried in public. What stood in Evelyn now was colder than heartbreak and steadier than rage. She had spent too many years learning how quickly a woman without money could be reduced to gratitude, how often survival was renamed obedience by the people demanding it. "I want not to be ruined by a man's choice," she said. "I want my work, my name, and my future to stop depending on whether someone richer grows bored." Victor took that in without interruption. The bourbon remained untouched between them like an unsigned contract. Most men in his world wanted softness they could dominate or ambition they could buy. Evelyn offered neither. She was not asking to be rescued. She was drawing terms. "That can be arranged," he said. Nothing in his voice sounded kind. Cold air moved through Victor Moretti's study with the controlled precision of central ventilation, carrying the scent of leather, smoke, and rain off the East River. Floor-to-ceiling windows cut Manhattan into shards of silver and black, while a single green banker's lamp threw old money light across contracts no ordinary lawyer would have drafted. Nothing in that room invited comfort. Everything in it measured consequence. Across from him, Evelyn did not soften. She listened as his attorney explained the arrangement in clipped, expensive syllables. A residence in one of Victor's secured properties, a new executive contract under a holding company not publicly tied to Adrian, private security assigned at Victor's discretion, and a confidentiality clause broad enough to bury a city block. It was protection, yes, but it was also enclosure. A different kind of cage. One lined in cashmere and guarded by men who carried handguns under tailored wool. Victor watched for the point where fear would make her grateful. It did not come. "I'll take the residence," Evelyn said, her voice even. "Not as a guest. As a tenant with a lease in my own name." The attorney paused. "I'll take the position," she continued, "only if my authority is written clearly enough that no one can reduce me to a favor." Victor's gaze sharpened, almost imperceptibly. Candlelight from the private dining room had hidden part of her steel. Here, under harder light, it looked forged. "And one more thing," she said. The room went still. "No access to me for Adrian. No messages through staff. No flowers. No apologies staged as concern. If he wants to speak to me, he does it in writing through counsel." For the first time that night, something close to surprise crossed Victor's face. Most people who entered his orbit asked for safety. Evelyn was asking for structure, distance, control. She was not reaching for the stronger hand. She was cutting off the weaker one. "That can be added," Victor said. Then she turned the blade deeper. "And if your protection makes me a story," she said, "I won't deny it." His attorney looked up sharply. Even Victor's men at the wall shifted their attention. Scandal in their world was not an accident. It was ammunition. Evelyn met Victor's eyes without flinching. "People are already talking. Let them talk in the correct direction." Meaning, not abandoned woman. Not discarded fiancé. Not collateral damage. Chosen danger. Victor leaned back slowly, studying her the way a man studies fire after realizing it has chosen where to spread. "You understand what that buys you. And what it costs," Evelyn said. By dawn, the first move was made. A black sedan took her not to some hidden apartment, but to Victor's stonefront townhouse on the Upper East Side, where where photographers were already lingering half a block away like scavengers with telephoto lenses. Someone had leaked movement. Someone always did. The car door opened, and the morning flashed white with camera bursts. Not secrecy. Declaration. Evelyn stepped out in the same dress she had worn the night before, cream silk now creased from war instead of dinner. Victor emerged a heartbeat later, one hand in his coat pocket, the other bare at his side, his expression carved from winter. He did not touch her. That made it worse. Touch could be explained away. Public proximity to a man like Victor Moretti could not. Whispers detonated before the front door even closed behind them. At Moretti Capital, assistants stopped speaking when her name appeared on internal calendars under the authority of a new executive office. In Adrian's family circle, two aunts called it depravity before noon. In the business press, an anonymous source described it as an unthinkable private realignment. In the darker corners of the city, the clubs with back rooms and silent elevators, men who had feared Victor for 20 years began asking whether the son had just been humiliated by the father in public. That question was poison. Adrian answered it badly. By mid-afternoon, he was in Victor's townhouse without permission, rage burning through the rooms before the butler could finish announcing him. Crystal stemware caught the chandelier light like rows of tiny knives, turning Victor Moretti's dining room into a place where elegance and threat sat at the same table. 12 settings had been laid with military precision. White roses stood low in the center, disciplined enough not to block anyone's view, and that detail alone said everything about the man hosting the evening. Nothing in his house was allowed to interfere with observation. Outside, rain traced the tall windows in silver threads. Inside, the staff moved in silence soft enough to feel rehearsed. Evelyn entered not as a guest and not as a servant, but as something far more dangerous, an unanswered question. Victor had placed her 3 seats to his right, not beside Adrian, not at the far end where scandals were politely buried, close enough for every member of the family to understand that she had not been hidden. The room shifted before anyone spoke. A cousin paused with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. An older aunt lowered her eyes to her plate with the reflex of someone who had lived long enough around power to know when a bloodline had just been challenged. Adrian, already standing near the fireplace with a tumbler in his hand, went still in a way that looked almost calm until one noticed how hard his jaw had locked. Sabrina noticed first. Her smile came a second later, small, lacquered, venomous. "Well," she said, sliding into her chair and addressed the color of fresh blood. Victor always did enjoy collecting surprises. The line landed lightly, but it was bait, and everyone heard the hook beneath it. Evelyn did not look at Adrian. That was the first wound she gave him all night. She sat with her back straight, her hands quiet in her lap, and thanked the housemaid who poured her water with the same courtesy she would have offered a queen. Victor saw that. So did the others. In rooms built on hierarchy, manners could become a weapon sharper than insult. Dinner began under the cover of formality. First course, low conversation, silver against china. Then Sabrina broke the skin of it. "I was curious," she said, dabbing her mouth though she had barely eaten. "What exactly is the etiquette for this situation? When a woman changes loyalties in the same family, does one send a note, or simply update the seating chart?" A few people stared down at their plates. One man coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh and immediately regretted it when Victor's eyes lifted. Adrian answered before Evelyn could. "You should ask her," he said, voice tight with whiskey and humiliation. "She seems to adapt quickly." That was the old battlefield. Public shame, thrown at her and expected to stick. But this house was no longer neutral ground. Evelyn lifted her glass, took one measured sip of water, and set it back down without a tremor. "No," she said, her voice level enough to shame the theatrics around her. "I adapt accurately. There's a difference." The room went silent. Sabrina leaned forward, delighted now, sensing heat. "Accurately? Is that what they call ambition when it arrives in borrowed silk?" Victor did not interrupt. That was the lesson of his world. He did not protect what merely suffered. He protected what proved itself under pressure. Evelyn understood that before the soup plates were cleared. She turned her face towards Sabrina at last. "Borrowed implies temporary," she said. "You should be careful with that word. Some women spend years in a man's life and still leave with nothing but photographs and a reputation no one respects. Sabrina froze mid-smile. A fork touched porcelain somewhere down the table with a tiny, fatal sound. Adrian pushed back his chair so hard the carved legs scraped the floor. Enough. Victor's gaze moved to his son, cold and immediate. Sit. It was one word. Steel. Marble. Law. Adrian remained standing for one reckless second too long, and everyone in that room saw the exact moment the balance shifted from family embarrassment to family disobedience. Victor did not raise his voice. That was what made the room dangerous. He kept his hand on the back of the chair, his knuckles pale against the dark wood, while the silence around the table tightened like wire. Evelyn felt every pair of eyes move to her, not with sympathy, but with expectation, as if the room wanted her to become smaller under pressure. Instead, Victor turned slightly and said, "Dinner is over." No one moved. Not at first. Then the staff began to retreat, fast and quiet, clearing crystal and silver as if they were erasing evidence. Adrian stayed frozen, his jaw locked, his anger suddenly poor and childish in a room built from power. Victor did not look at him again. He looked at Evelyn. "Walk with me." The hallway beyond the dining room was all polished stone and low amber light, with portraits of dead men watching from the walls like judges who had never loved anyone alive. Evelyn followed at a measured pace, aware of how Adrian's rage throbbed behind them, unable to find a target that would not ruin him. Victor opened a side door to his study and let her in first, not as a courtesy, but as a decision. "Close it." The click of the door sounded final. In the quiet, the city pressed faintly against the windows, a far-off grid of headlights and rain-smeared towers. Victor crossed to the bar, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and set one glass untouched on the desk. Evelyn saw the tension he had been carrying for days now, the restrained violence, the vigilance, the part of him that never forgot a debt or a betrayal. Yet there was something else, too, something more dangerous than anger. "You do not flinch when he challenges me," Victor said. "I've had less reason to trust him than you." That earned the smallest shift at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. He moved closer, stopping just short of her personal space, close enough that the heat of him changed the air. "Trust is expensive here. So is loyalty." Evelyn lifted her chin. "Then tell me the price." For a moment, he did not answer. The old menace in him stayed visible, but it no longer felt cold. It felt controlled, and control was somehow more intimate than softness. He reached into the desk drawer, withdrew a slim black folder, and laid it between them. Inside were names, dates, routes, payments, evidence of a quiet war she had only begun to understand. "If you stay near me, you will be watched, used, tested, and if they see weakness, they will go through you to reach me." "I know." "No," he said, voice lower now. "You know the idea. You don't yet know the hunger." His words landed harder than any insult Adrian had thrown. Evelyn's fingers tightened once, then relaxed. The room seemed to narrow around them, the study turning into a sealed chamber where strategy and desire wore the same face. Victor stepped behind her and lifted a hand, not touching, only hovering near the back of her shoulder as if checking whether she would pull away. She did not. That hesitation, that almost touch, changed everything. Not because it was grand, but because it was careful, because it asked permission in a world that usually took without asking. "Tomorrow," Victor said, "you learn how to walk into a room and leave it with the power still in your hands." Evelyn turned just enough to look at him. "And if I fail?" His gaze held hers, steady and unreadable. "Then I teach you again." The vow was quiet, but it carried the weight of a threat and a promise at once. Outside the study, a floorboard creaked. Adrian, still somewhere in the house, still angry enough to become reckless. Inside, the distance between Victor and Evelyn had shortened in a way no one in that dining room had intended, and no one could now pretend not to see. The alliance was no longer only tactical. Rain tapped softly against the study window, thin and steady, like a warning that had learned patience. Adrian's sabotage arrived not with a shout, but with a file dropped onto Victor Moretti's desk, pages fanned open under the amber lamp. Inside were old photographs, sealed court records, and a name Evelyn had never spoken aloud in this house. The foster father who had taken her in after her mother died, then disappeared after a bribery investigation that ruined him. Victor read every page without blinking, his face carved in marble. "He knew your first lie," Adrian said from the doorway, smiling with poison in it. "And now Dad gets to know the rest." The study went still. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her, not because the secret was false, but because it had been weaponized by someone who had never cared where pain landed. Her past had never been her shame. It was the reason she had learned how to survive in rooms built to humiliate her. But Adrian had found the oldest bruise and pressed hard enough to make it bleed in public. She turned toward Victor, and for one dangerous second, the silence between them was louder than any accusation. "Read the next page," she said. Victor did not move. His gaze stayed on the record, then lifted to her with a coldness that was not anger yet, only discipline. Adrian had wanted a fight. What he got was distance. Evelyn took one step forward, then another, and told the truth before he could ask the wrong question. Her foster father had taught music at a community center in South Boston. When the investigation came, she was 16, and she had been forced to sign statements she did not understand just to keep him from prison longer. After he vanished, she worked 3 jobs, stayed invisible, and learned exactly how men with money used paper to erase people. The room heard everything. No one breathed. "I didn't come here to hide from your family," she said. "I came here because I know what it looks like when power turns cruelty into law." Adrian laughed once, sharp and ugly. "And that's supposed to make us trust you?" Victor finally stood. The chair behind him scraped the floor like a blade being drawn. He crossed to the desk, picked up the file, and tore the top page in half. Then another. Then he placed the torn pieces back down as if he were measuring the weight of a lie. The move was calm, almost ritualistic, and it hit harder than shouting ever could. "Get out," Victor said. Adrian's smile faded. "What? Not her." One word. The whole house felt it. Adrian's face hardened, and he shoved the file across the desk, scattering papers like a failed verdict. "You're choosing her over blood?" Victor's eyes never left Evelyn. "I'm choosing the truth over your cowardice." The sentence landed with such force that Adrian actually stepped back. For once, the son had no performance left. He had expected suspicion, maybe punishment for Evelyn, maybe a private apology behind closed doors. He had not expected Victor to defend her in front of him while the proof still lay in pieces on the desk. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she did not soften. She walked to the window, looked out at the dark gardens, and understood the cost immediately. Adrian would not forgive this. He had lost the easiest weapon, so he would find a crueler one. In the house below, servants moved silently, pretending not to listen. In the study, Victor's jaw remained set, but his hand, when it lowered, found the back of Evelyn's chair for one brief second, a quiet claim that changed the shape of the room. Then Adrian spoke again, low and venomous. "Fine. If she wants to be family, let her prove she's not the reason the old scandal starts breathing again." Victor turned toward him at last. "What scandal?" Adrian's expression told him enough before the words came. He had already opened a door no one could close. Rain kept ticking against the study window, soft as a lie trying to sound harmless. On Victor Moretti's desk, the file lay open like a blade laid flat before a war. Inside it were names, dates, and one old photograph that had no business being alive again. Adrian stood by the door with a smile that did not reach his eyes, while Evelyn felt the air tighten around her ribs, because the room had just turned from family business into a trap. One page mentioned an offshore account. Another hinted at a woman who had vanished years ago. Victor's jaw hardened, but his voice stayed calm enough to frighten everyone present. "Tell me exactly what you found." Adrian let out a dry laugh. "Not found. Confirmed." He stepped closer, hungry now for the moment when his father would look small. Our father's old mistakes always had a price, and now she's standing in the middle of them. Evelyn did not move, though every instinct told her to step back. The old scandal was not just gossip. It was the kind of wound that could poison bloodlines, destroy inheritances, and turn loyalty into suspicion. Victor read the page once, then again, as if discipline alone could erase what was written there. His hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "Get to the point." Adrian pointed at Evelyn. "The point is simple. If she is staying in this house, then she deserves to know what kind of family she's marrying into." The words landed like thrown glass. Evelyn's throat tightened, but her eyes stayed clear. In that silence, she understood the real weapon. Adrian did not want Victor angry. He wanted Victor doubtful. He wanted a father to flinch at his own chosen future. And for the first time that night, Victor looked not at the file, but at his son, as if measuring the cost of letting him live another minute with his mouth open. Enough, Victor said. No, Adrian snapped, and the brittle edge in his voice finally broke into open hatred. You don't get to protect her from this after choosing her over your own blood. The room went still. Victor rose slowly, the chair legs whispering against the floor. The movement was controlled, but the violence in it was unmistakable. Adrian's confidence faltered for one heartbeat, then hardened into defiance. Evelyn saw it all at once. The son trying to burn the house down from inside it, the father deciding whether mercy was still possible, and the scandal itself waiting in the file like a corpse refusing burial. Then she saw something else, one line in the document, a name linked to the missing woman, and a signature she recognized from the financial ledgers in Victor's private drawer. Her pulse sharpened. That account wasn't Victor's. Both men turned to her. Evelyn reached forward, took the file, and opened to the marked page. This was transferred under Adrian's access code. Her voice was quiet, but it cut the room clean in half. Adrian's face changed first, from rage to disbelief, then to a pale, dangerous silence. Victor did not speak. He only looked at his son as the truth settled in, heavy and irreversible. In that instant, the balance shifted. Adrian had tried to use the past as a weapon, and instead he had exposed his own hand. Did you do this? Victor asked. Adrian's lips parted, but nothing came out. Evelyn closed the file with one precise motion. He wanted your trust to collapse, she said. Now let it collapse on him. And for the first time, Victor did not shield his son. He reached for the phone, called security, ordered the records frozen. Then he looked at Adrian with a coldness more final than shouting. You will not touch this family's name again. Adrian stared, stunned by the speed of his own fall. The room had changed shape. The son who came to destroy had become the evidence. The woman he meant to discredit had become the one who decided where the truth landed. No one spoke as the thunder rolled once over the roof and died. Victor did not raise his voice. He simply picked up the open file, closed it once, and set it squarely in front of Adrian, as if placing a coffin lid over a lie. The rain kept pressing against the windows of the study, but inside, the silence had become heavier than weather. Evelyn stood near the firelight, her hands calm, her face unreadable, while Adrian looked from the file to his father and realized the room no longer belonged to him. Read the last page, Victor said. Adrian did not move at first. Then he reached for it with a hand that had lost its certainty. The page was short, clear, final. It named the transfer of voting control, the lock on every account tied to his access, and the removal of his rights from the family trust. The inheritance he had treated like a birthright had already been sealed away. His throat tightened, not with anger now, but with the shock of a man watching the floor vanish under polished shoes. He looked up at Evelyn. You gave him this. Evelyn did not flinch. No, she said softly. You gave it to yourself. That landed harder than any insult. Adrian had spent too long mistaking cruelty for strength, and now the cost had arrived dressed in paperwork and stillness. He turned to Victor, searching for hesitation, for sentiment, for any crack in the steel. There was none. Victor's expression was colder than the storm outside, but it was not empty. It was the look of a man who had finally chosen order over indulgence. Evelyn took one step forward, and the room seemed to hold its breath with her. You wanted to own everything, she said. But you never understood the difference between possession and respect. Adrian's jaw clenched. He had no answer that could save him. Outside, a siren drifted faintly through the rain, and inside, the old power dynamic collapsed in real time. Victor crossed to the desk, opened the drawer, and placed a second envelope on top of the first. Adrian saw the seal and went pale. Your last attempt to move assets this morning has already been flagged, Victor said. Your access ends tonight. Adrian laughed once, sharp and broken. You'd cut off your own son? Victor did not look away. I would cut off a threat to this family. That was the moment Adrian finally understood. The game was over, and he had lost not because he was outmatched in force, but because he had mistaken greed for inheritance. He had built his future on humiliation, and now humiliation had come back for him. Evelyn turned toward Victor, and the choice in her face was not uncertain anymore. She was not standing beside him because she had nowhere else to go. She stood there because she had seen what kind of man he was when the mask dropped, and she had chosen the harder road with eyes open. Victor reached for her hand, not possessive, not performative, but steady. She took it. Adrian watched them, and something in him cracked for good. The woman he had tried to belittle was no longer available to his story. She had outlived his judgment. She had become the measure he failed. Security, Victor said, not loudly. 2 guards entered at once. Adrian stepped back, then stopped, because there was nowhere left that still belonged to him. He looked at the family crest above the fireplace, then at the papers, then at Evelyn's quiet face. For the first time in his life, he had no audience to impress and no throne to climb. The guards took his coat. One held the door. The other waited. Adrian glanced once at his father, desperate for some late mercy. Victor gave none. Adrian was escorted out into the rain, stripped of love, stripped of status, stripped of the name he had abused. The door shut behind him with a sound that felt final enough to rewrite blood. Inside, the fire crackled once. Evelyn squeezed Victor's hand, then released it only long enough to close the file herself. Not as a victim,